I had the dress. I had the flowers. I had 200 guests watching me stand at the altar while my phone buzzed with a text from the man I was supposed to marry, telling me he was already on a plane. I thought that was the worst moment of my life. I was wrong. The worst moment was turning around and seeing every single person in that church staring at me with that exact expression. The one that's half pity and half relief that it wasn't them. I walked out, and the only person who followed me was the last person I expected. Adriana Voss, my fiancé's older sister. The one who had always been too sharp, too serious, too everything for me to ever feel comfortable around. She put me in her car, drove me to her apartment, and told me I wasn't going anywhere until I ate something. That was 6 months ago. I haven't left. Not because she won't let me, but because she's the first person in a long time who made me feel like staying was a choice worth making. I had been planning the wedding for 14 months. That's the detail people always seem surprised by when I tell the story. 14 months. Not 6, not 8, 14. I had chosen the flowers in April of the year before, picked the venue in June, spent 4 consecutive Saturdays tasting cake with my mother, who cried at every single one because she cried at everything, and I had done all of it with the absolute conviction that what I was building was real. That Marcus Voss loved me. That I loved Marcus Voss. That the life we had drawn on paper together was the life that was actually coming. I was 28 years old, and I had never been more certain of anything. I know how that sounds now. I know the word for it is naive, or maybe just hopeful, in the way that people are hopeful before the world corrects them. But at the time, it felt like certainty. And certainty feels like the most solid thing in the world, right up until the moment it isn't. The text came through at 11:47 in the morning. I was standing in the bridal room at the back of St. Catherine's with my maid of honor, Priya, fixing the button on my left glove, and my mother standing by the window, doing that specific kind of crying that she did at everything beautiful. And I was calm. That's the part I keep coming back to. I was calm. I wasn't nervous the way people said you were supposed to be nervous. I was just present, just in it, just ready. And then my phone buzzed on the vanity table, and Priya glanced at it before I did, and something happened to her face that I had never seen happen to Priya's face in 12 years of friendship. It went completely still. She looked up at me, she looked back at the phone, and she made a decision in that second to pick it up and hand it to me, instead of making the other decision, which would have been to put it in her bag and deal with the fallout later. And I will spend the rest of my life not knowing if that was the right call. I read it. It wasn't long. It said, "I'm sorry. I couldn't do it. I'm on the AA flight to Miami. I'll call you when I land. Please don't be there when I get back." I read it twice. I put the phone down on the vanity table. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, the dress, the hair, the veil, all the 14 months of planning sitting on my body like architecture. And I said to Priya, very calmly, "He's gone." She said my name. I said, "I need you to go tell the officiant to dismiss the guests." She said my name again, "Priya." She went. My mother was still standing by the window. She had heard. She hadn't moved. I looked at her for a moment, and then I picked up my bouquet because I didn't know what else to do with my hands, and I walked out of the bridal room into the side hallway and then through the main door of the church because I could not be in that room when the guests came out, and I could not stand at that altar, and I physically could not watch 200 people look at me with that face. The face. You know the one. It's the face people make when something terrible happens to someone else, and they feel bad about it, but underneath the feeling bad, there is this bedrock of relief, this there but for the grace of God current running under everything. And it's not their fault for feeling it, it's just human. But I could not absorb 200 versions of it in a single afternoon. I sat on the front steps of St. Catherine's in my wedding dress in November, and the cold hit me immediately, and I didn't move. I just sat there. The doors were closed behind me. I could hear the muffled sound of the organ stopping, and then voices, confused at first and then louder, and I sat there in the cold and stared at the street and thought absolutely nothing. Shock is strange that way. It empties you so completely that for a few minutes there isn't even pain. There's just a kind of white silence where everything used to be. The door opened behind me. I didn't turn around because I knew it would be Priya or my mother, and I didn't have anything to give either of them yet. But the footsteps were wrong. Too deliberate, too even. And then she sat down next to me on the steps, and I looked, and it was Adriana. Adriana Voss, Marcus's older sister. 34 to his 29, to my 28. She was wearing a dark green dress that I remembered from when she'd arrived at the church that morning, her hair in that low chignon she always wore, and she had her coat in her hands because she'd taken it off, and she put it around my shoulders without asking, and without saying anything first. I looked at her. She looked at the street. "He does this," she said. Her voice was flat. Not unkind, just flat. Like someone stating a fact they've stated before and are tired of, but aren't going to dress up. "He did it to the girl before you. Different circumstances, same ending." I didn't say anything. "I've been telling him for 2 years he wasn't ready," she said. "He doesn't listen to me." Still the street. Still that flatness that was somehow steadier than sympathy would have been. "For what it's worth," she said, and now she looked at me, those dark eyes direct and without the face, without any version of the face. "This is entirely about him, nothing about you." I looked back at the street. "I know that," I said, and I did know it, intellectually, the way you know things before the rest of you catches up. "Good," she said. She stood up. "Come on. I'm taking you somewhere that isn't here." I didn't argue. I don't know why I didn't argue. I barely knew Adriana. She had always been the presence at Voss family dinners that I couldn't quite get comfortable with. Too contained, too watchful. The kind of person whose approval you could feel yourself wanting without knowing why. But I didn't argue. I got into her car, a dark sedan that was clean and quiet and smelled faintly of coffee, and she drove without asking where I wanted to go. I understood after a few minutes that we were heading toward the newer part of the city, toward the high-rises near the waterfront, and I didn't ask questions. My phone was ringing. Priya, my mother. 3 numbers I didn't recognize. I turned it face down on my lap. Adriana didn't comment on this. She drove with one hand on the wheel and the other on the gear shift, and she didn't turn the radio on, and she didn't try to fill the silence. And that silence was the kindest thing anyone had given me in the last hour. Her apartment was on the 18th floor. It was large and spare, and everything in it was in its right place with a precision that wasn't sterile, but was definite. This is where things live. This is how this space functions. Nothing is here by accident. She took the coat back from my shoulders and hung it in the entry closet and pointed at the couch and said, "Sit," and went to the kitchen. I sat. The city was through the floor-to-ceiling windows across from me, mid-afternoon gray and November quiet, and I sat in a wedding dress on a stranger's couch and looked at it, and the white silence started to crack at the edges, just slightly. I could feel the first wave of real feeling coming in, the way you feel weather coming, that pressure change that tells you something is about to arrive. I held it off. I was good at holding things off. Adriana came back with a glass of water and a plate with bread and cheese on it and put them on the coffee table in front of me. "Eat something," she said. "I'm not hungry." "I know. Eat something anyway." She sat in the armchair across from me with her own glass of water, and she looked at me with that direct look that I was starting to understand was just how she looked at things. Fully, without blinking. The way you look when you're actually trying to see something rather than just being polite about it. I picked up a piece of bread. I ate it. She was right. The way that people who are right about practical things in moments of crisis are right. My body needed it, even if I didn't know it. I stayed that night. It was Adriana's suggestion delivered as a statement. "You're not going back to the apartment tonight. The guest room is there." She pointed. I opened my mouth to say something about being fine, about imposing, about all the social protocols that activate automatically in uncomfortable situations, and she said, "It's not a discussion," in that tone that closed doors, and I stopped. The guest room had a bathroom attached, and she brought me a shirt and sweatpants without being asked and left them on the bed and closed the door. I stood in her bathroom in my wedding dress and looked at myself in the mirror, and the wave that had been coming finally arrived. I sat on the tile floor in 14 months of planning, and I cried for a long time. Not for Marcus, I realized somewhere in the middle of it. Not really for Marcus. For the idea I'd had of what I was building. For the certainty. For the version of my life I'd been moving toward with such complete conviction that the absence of it felt like a physical place that had been taken away. I cried until there was nothing left, and then I washed my face and changed and got into the guest bed and slept for 11 hours, which was the longest I'd slept in years. I was going to leave in the morning. That was the plan I'd made on the tile floor. Spend the night, thank her, leave, start the process of dealing with the practical catastrophe of an unwedding. But in the morning, Adriana was in the kitchen making actual coffee. Not from a pod, from a grinder and a pour-over that she did with the same precision she applied to everything. And she put a cup in front of me without asking how I took it, and it was exactly how I took it, and I didn't ask how she knew. We sat at her kitchen island and drank coffee, and she said, without preamble, "What do you need to handle today?" Not, "What do you feel?" Not, "How are you?" Not the therapeutic opening that people reach for when they don't know what else to do. What do you need to handle? I thought about it. The apartment. It's his name on the lease, but my things are there. Do you have anywhere to go? Priya's couch. My mother's house 3 hours north. Neither of them felt possible. Not immediately. She drank her coffee. Then stay here until you do. It was said with the same tone as everything else she said. Definite, no performance attached to it, take it or leave it. I looked at her. She looked at her coffee. Adriana, "It's a guest room," she said. "It's not occupied. You're not an imposition. Sort your situation, then go." I stayed. Days passed in a rhythm that I hadn't chosen, but that held me anyway. Adriana left early for work. She ran a structural engineering firm, something I'd known abstractly from years of Voss family dinners, but had never thought about in detail. And I had the apartment to myself during the day, which I used to make the phone calls that needed making. The venue, the caterers, the photographer. Each one of those calls was its own specific grief. A brief, transactional morning of something planned and now canceled. And I made them at the kitchen island with coffee, and I didn't let myself feel any of it until the calls were done. Adriana came home in the evenings and cooked with that same methodical precision. Good food, nothing complicated. And we ate at the kitchen island and talked. At first about practical things, the timeline on getting my belongings from the apartment, the legal question of the deposits, the logistics. Then about less practical things. She asked about my work. I was in exhibit design. I built the spatial experience of museum shows. With what I started to understand was genuine curiosity, not politeness. She asked detailed questions. She remembered what I'd said the day before and built on it. Nobody had asked me about my work like that in a long time. Marcus had liked the idea of my job, the interesting at dinner parties version of it. But Adriana asked about load-bearing walls and lighting angles and how you decided where the eye should go in a space. I talked for an hour one night before I realized how long I'd been talking. She was watching me with that direct look. "You're very good at this," she said. "I don't know about that." "I do," she said. "I build things. I can tell when someone understands how space works." I looked at my plate. Something warm had arrived in my chest, and I didn't examine it too closely. The Marcus question had to come eventually. It came on day 9. I'd gotten a voicemail from him, the promised call from Miami, which I'd listened to once and then deleted. It said what those calls always say, that he was sorry, that he cared about me, that it wasn't about me, that he hoped someday I'd understand. The voicemail of a man who wanted to feel like he'd closed something without having to be present for the closing. I told Adriana about it over dinner. Her expression didn't change. "Did he say anything that surprised you?" "No." "Did you want him to?" I thought about it honestly. "No," I said. "I think I just wanted it to be over." She nodded slowly. "He's always needed the exit already planned before he commits to entering," she said. "It's not cruelty. It's cowardice dressed as caution." She said it without bitterness and without defense of him, just with the tired clarity of someone who has spent a long time understanding something they wished were different. "Does it bother you?" I asked. "That he did this to me?" She looked at me steadily. "Yes," she said. And the way she said it wasn't the yes of family obligation. It wasn't the yes of course it bothers me he's my brother. It was quieter than that, more specific. I held it. I didn't ask her to explain it. The shift happened slowly, and then, in one specific moment that I knew even as it was happening, was a before and after. We were 2 weeks in, and I had gotten the last of my things from the apartment, and I was sorting through boxes in the guest room, and Adriana came to the doorway and leaned against the frame watching me and said, "You don't have to rush this." And I said, "I should figure out my next steps." And she said, "You're allowed to not have next steps yet." And I looked up at her from the floor, where I was sitting surrounded by the physical remains of my previous life, And something about her standing there in the doorway, arms crossed, that expression that I had once read as cold and now read as careful. Something about it broke something open in me in a way that was different from the crying on the tile floor. That had been grief. This was something that didn't have the same name. "Why are you being this kind to me?" I said. It came out more direct than I meant it. She didn't flinch. She looked at me for a moment. "Because you needed someone to be," she said. "And because I wanted to." The second half of that sentence sat between us in a way the first half didn't. I looked back at the box in front of me. My hands weren't quite steady. "Adriana." "Don't," she said, not unkindly. "Not yet. Sort your boxes." I sorted my boxes, but the sentence stayed. The something I wasn't examining grew in the way things grow when you give them warmth and proximity and honesty and enough quiet that they can actually develop. I was aware of it the way you're aware of a change in season. Not one day, but a cumulative thing. A series of mornings where the light is slightly different, slightly more. The way I knew what she took in her coffee now, and she knew what I took in mine. The way we had migrated from the kitchen island to the couch on the evenings she got home early, and she read and I worked on freelance sketches, and the quiet between us had its own texture, comfortable and present. The way she laughed, which she didn't do often, but when she did, it was real, not performed. And the first time I made her actually laugh, I felt it in my chest like a struck chord. The way she touched things carefully. The way she listened, fully, without waiting for her turn. I had spent 2 years with Marcus, and I had loved him. And I had not known him this way. I had not been known this way. It arrived in me slowly, this understanding. And when I finally let myself look directly at it, really look, not the peripheral glancing I'd been doing, it was so obvious that I couldn't find the line where it had started. I almost said it wrong one evening. We were washing up after dinner, side by side at the sink, and she handed me a glass to dry, and her fingers covered mine for a moment around the stem, and neither of us moved immediately. And I turned to look at her, and she was already looking at me, and the kitchen felt very small, and I said, "Adriana, I think," and she said, "I know," very quietly. Not what I think, just, "I know." As if she had been carrying it as long as I had, and had been waiting for me to say it first. "It's complicated," I said. "Yes," she agreed. "You're his sister." "Yes. And I was going to marry him 2 weeks ago." 3 weeks ago, she corrected me gently. "I'm aware of the complications." I looked at the glass in my hands. "Does it bother you? The fact that my brother is an idiot who let go of the best thing that's happened to this family in years?" A pause. "No." She took the glass from my hands and put it in the cabinet and turned back to me, and she was close, closer than the kitchen required, and she looked at me with that complete directness that I had stopped trying to escape from and started trying to earn. "What bothers me," she said, "is the idea of you leaving." I stayed. Not staying as in staying in the apartment, though that too, for another month while everything settled, but staying as in the other thing, the harder thing, the thing that didn't have a clean shape yet, but that both of us were willing to build toward carefully, with the same attention you bring to anything structural, anything you want to last. It wasn't easy in all the ways it wasn't going to be easy. There were conversations with Marcus that Adriana navigated without me, because that was hers to navigate, and she did it with the same efficiency she brought to everything complicated. There was a version of the family that took time, and there was the Priya conversation, which was its own thing entirely, and there was the work of me becoming myself again, outside of the relationship I'd had and the one I was building. Just me, which Adriana was specific about. She would tell me sometimes, when I was in her kitchen or working on the couch, just out of nowhere. That's good. That's you. Keep going. As if she was monitoring something, as if she was watching me come back to myself and considered it important. 6 months after a November morning on church steps, I am in Adriana's apartment. Our apartment, in the way that space becomes shared when two people decide to share it deliberately, when you stop being a guest and start being the other half of a home. I know where she keeps the things she considers important. I know the difference between the silence that means she's processing and the silence that means she just wants to be quiet. And she knows the same about me. I know that she is not cold. She never was cold. That was never the right word. She is just someone who does not perform warmth, but provides it, steadily, specifically, in the forms that actually help rather than the forms that look nice. Last week, she came home with a book about exhibition design that she'd ordered because she'd heard me mention the author once in passing 3 months ago. She put it on my desk. She didn't say anything about it. She didn't need to. That's how she says things. I'm learning to say things her way, too. I'm learning what it feels like to be known by someone who paid attention from the beginning. I had a plan. I had 14 months of one specific plan, and then one text message, and then I had nothing. And I thought that nothing was the worst thing that had ever happened to me. I know now that it wasn't the worst thing. It was the necessary thing. The architecture of my life had been built around a shape that was wrong, and when it collapsed, the way things that are built wrong eventually always collapse, it cleared space for something built right. I don't say this lightly. I know the version of this story where you romanticize the wreckage and make the disaster into destiny, and that's not what I'm doing. What I'm doing is saying that I sat on church steps in November in a wedding dress, and someone sat down next to me and put a coat around my shoulders and didn't give me the face, and that turned out to matter more than I knew how to measure at the time. Some people find you at the beginning and they stay. And some people find you at the exact moment when everything you thought was certain becomes uncertain. And they sit down next to you in the cold, and they are steady in a way that changes what you thought steady meant. I found her when my plan fell apart, and I would do it all again, every painful piece of it, for where it led.